All right, let's talk about bringing a claim against your employer. Basically, if you're reaching out to an employment lawyer, your question is, was I treated illegally? Now, I would say within being treated illegally, there are probably two big categories that your employment action might fall under. Number one is if you were treated illegally while you were at your place of work. And number two is whether the grounds that you were given for being terminated from your work were illegal. Now, within those two categories, there's going to be a ton of stuff, of course. But just to briefly give a basic overview of some things that I think you might have grounds to sue your employer over. Number one, things while you're at your place of work are a big category is going to be discrimination, and another big category is going to be fair medical leave. So for discrimination, the big thing with discrimination is whether or not you were discriminated against as being part of a protected class. Even if your employer is a real jerk, real mean, or treating you unfairly, at least in some way it seems unfair, what really matters is whether or not their treatment of you is based on the fact that you're part of a protected class. And those protected classes under federal law are race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and religion. And if those are the bases for your discrimination, then you might have a claim that you could bring against your employer. And then if you can bring a claim, it's important to note that depending on the size of your employer is going to potentially limit the damages that you could bring, except for race. If it's a race-based claim, there are no damages caps. And then aside from those damages caps though, you can get front and back pay, and those things don't fall within those caps. And those caps, just so you know, are anywhere from $25,000 to $300,000 depending on the size of your employer. So that's a very quick little picture of discrimination-based claims against your employer. Second thing that I brought up briefly here was the Federal Medical Leave Act. Basically, if you were fired or treated unfairly by your employer for taking medical leave, either for yourself or for a family member, then you might have grounds for coming against your employer. You can't get compensatory damages in these actions, and you have to have been working there for 12 months if it's a private employer. If it's a public employer, doesn't matter. If it's a private employer, you have to be working there for 12 months, and if you were discriminated against, or you were treated unfairly or fired for taking fair medical leave, you might be able to get front and back pay. Front pay is predicting out into the future, is a little bit harder to get, or back pay, since trial takes so long to schedule. If you sue, your back pay is from the date of your termination all the way up until your trial date, and a lot of times trial's not for 2 years, maybe a year at the earliest. So you could at least get back pay a good chunk of time that was taken away from you on top of interest that's added to your time that you're waiting for your judgment. So those are two big things that you can come against your employer for while you're at work, is either discrimination or federal medical leave. And then quickly, if you're leaving or you're forced to leave your employer because you're terminated, the big category there, as you might expect, is wrongful termination. Wrongful termination, you can almost think of it the exact same way as discrimination and federal medical leave or other grounds for being treated unfairly. The only difference is, rather than it just being something that you're going through and maybe pushes you to quit, it becomes the reason that your employer fires you. And if someone fires you for being part of a protected class, taking medical leave, or other categories we didn't talk about, like being part of a class of people that's under a protected disability, then you also might have grounds to come against your employer and sue them. So there is a little quick crash course on grounds that you might have for coming against your employer in an employment law plaintiff's lawsuit.